In this video I'm going to show how to take a box design such as this and turn it into a illustration of what the finished box might look like. To do that, we're going to use the perspective drawing tools in Illustrator. So start with a new file. Letter in portrait mode is fine for this. And you want to turn on the perspective drawing grid, perspective grid tool. It's right underneath the shape builder tool. And the first thing we need to do before starting to draw our box is we want to adjust the view of the grid here so that we get the view that we want. I want it to be more of front view than an even side view here. This is a 2-point perspective grid. And I also want to be somewhat looking down on it so I'll see a little bit of the top. So back over here, this is the horizon, this line here. I want to click on the diamond at the end here and drag that up a little bit. So I'll be able to see down on my box a little bit. And then I want to move the grid, the center line a little bit over to the right. So I'm going to grab this circle down here, move it over this way, and then move this one to meet it. Also, I want to be somewhat wider in my spread so that it's not quite so accentuated with a point at the bottom. So zoom out some more and come up here to the top corner here. Drag that one out that direction, and this one out a little bit more this direction. Then I can adjust my horizon a little bit higher. And I'll zoom in close to the bottom here to make sure my corners are intersecting, just so it's easier to line those up. And that looks pretty good. So I've got my perspective grid set up. Then I want to change to the perspective selection tool here. So that's nested underneath the perspective grid tool, shortcut Shift V. Now I need the artwork to put it. So I'm going to go back to my product design here. And I want to start with the front of my box. I want all the artwork that's the front of the box. So I'll use my selection tool. I'll select the entire front here, but then I'll shift to deselect the top part here and copy that. And then moving back to my perspective drawing project, I will paste that artwork in. Let's bring it over here on the side for right now. You can see I have all that artwork there. I'll go ahead and group that just to make it easier to move around. Now, using the perspective selection tool, I want to select which face I want to put this artwork on. So I can do that up here with this little widget here to select the left grid or the bottom grid or the right grid. And the little cursor shows you the direction that it should be pointing. So that little arrow to the left shows that I want to be on this grid here. Now when I grab my artwork here and drag it, it will automatically snap into perspective, and I can place it where I want on my grid. I want it to be located right down here in the corner, and I'll drag it using Shift to make it larger. So I have the front of my box on there. I'm going to do the same with the sides. So I'm going to go to the package again here, and I'm going to select with the regular selection tool the side of my box. Shift to deselect this top part here. Control copy. Come over here, Control V, paste. I'll group it again. And then this time, using the perspective grid selection tool, or perspective selection tool, I want to go to the right side of the grid, which you can also access with the number 3, and click, and it'll try that again. Oh, that was correct. So I click and drag it over here to my box, get it down to the corner, and again, resize it. I'll hold the shift down to resize it. Where I want it to be, I'll zoom in a little bit so I can adjust it. I got the side of my box on. And finally I want the top. So I'll go back to the design, select the top here. Now we can make sure I get the 99 cent there. I need the top flap there, so just that, Control copy. Come back to the project and paste it. I'm going to group it. And now I want the horizontal grid. Now when I pull this one down, it's going to assume that it's down on the floor. So I'm going to place it down in place on the floor. And then I'm going to resize it so that it's the proper size. However, I want it to be on the top of my box. So the way that I do that is I use the keyboard key 5. I hold down 5. And now when I drag this, I can move it perpendicularly in this plane that I'm working on. So I'm moving it perpendicularly up. I'm holding down the key 5 till I get it in place where I want it. And I'll zoom in a little bit there. A little bit too high, so we'll go back down a little bit. Again, holding 5. And there we go. I can turn off the perspective grid tool by clicking on the little X in the widget here. I have to be using one of the tools though. You can also turn off the grid by going to View, Perspective Grid, and Hide Grid or Show Grid. Now, one thing to note is that it doesn't really have definition for the corners due to the fact that it's the solid color through. So I can add some outline to it if I like. I'll double click here so I'm in isolation mode. And I'll just add a light black outline of about a 1/4 point. And I'll do that for the 3 sides. And that looks better. Now also note, these, although it appears as if I worked in 3 dimensions here, it's really still just working in perspective. And these shapes are now just skewed shapes. They're not actually 3D. If I'm not in the perspective grid tool, if I click and drag it around, it's not going to move within perspective. I have to be in the perspective grid tool to be able to do it. And if I resize these shapes, and I turn the perspective grid back on, it doesn't match up. I've just resized those shapes. So it's not really 3 dimensions, it just changes the shape of those using that perspective grid tool. But now I have a nice representation of what my product box looks like. You can change how it looks by changing those, the way the grid is set up. Keep in mind that you can only put vector artwork onto the perspective grid. If you had an image or something like that, you would not be able to drop that into the perspective grid. It would give an error. So it has to be vector artwork for everything. And that's the end of this tutorial.